2025. The high-level agenda for today is I'll talk briefly about the OSEP conference and the preparation and planning and getting ready for that. And then we've got Stacy Williams, who will talk to us briefly about New York's MTSS Summit, which is super exciting and I believe is open to people joining if you're able to. And then following that, we're going to continue our coaching series. And today's talking about practice-based coaching and data-informed decision making. Super excited to learn and hear more about that from our presenters. But before that, let's talk briefly about the OSEP conference. The reminders are that that's happening in August 5th and 6th in Crystal City, Gateway Marriott Hotel in Virginia. Of course, that's where it's been held for quite a few years now. The OSEP conference website is available to register. I'm not sure if proposals are still being accepted or not, but of course, that's where you would find out on that website about that, as well as lodging and any updates on the event. For Part D grantees, including SPDIG, only project directors are able to attend. But note that accepted presenters are also able to attend. So that's new this year. It'll be a little bit of a smaller group for us for the program area meeting that's, of course, held at the OSEP conference. And then looking out a little further, we've got the SPDIG National Meeting. The topics for that is dissemination, partnerships, and impact. That'll be happening October 15th and 16th. And this year, we're opting to do that virtual in order to accommodate some of the unknowns around states being able to travel in October. Please feel free to invite your PTIs and CPRCs and higher education partners and any district partners. So it's one of those things where it's always the more the merrier with the SIG network. It's really a community that tries to network among everyone, and the larger the network is, the better it is for all of us. So you should have received an email from SIG Network. It's got a planning guide for the SPDIG at the OSEP conference and the SPDIG national meeting. That's a PDF attachment that Jennifer Coffey and myself developed. It's called the SPDIG at the OSEP conference and beyond, which of course is a nod towards it's getting us ready for the SPDIG national meeting as well. And it describes our plan for the next 6 months. If you haven't received it, please reach out to me at signetwork@uoregon.edu, and I'll make sure that you get added to the list so that you can get that, and I will forward that email on to you. As you'll see, or you maybe have already seen in that planning guide before the OSEP conference, form a dissemination team and set regular meetings to prepare for some of the work that we're going to be ready to do. Also, complete step 1 of the dissemination workbook. Again, in that email, if you haven't gotten it, let me know. If you have, take a look at it again if you haven't already. There's a link to the dissemination workbook in that. So complete step 1 of that workbook with your SPDIG team. Review step 2 and plan to draft it by close of business August 6th. So remember, August 6th is at the OSEP conference. If you're at the OSEP conference, we can work on that there. If you're not, you can work on that with your team in the background in your home states. And then, of course, preview the scavenger hunt. So let me see. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for, oh, actually not. I was going to show the scavenger hunt, but we've got a tight schedule today, so maybe I'll hold back on that. So during the OSEP conference, again, that's August 5th, 6th. This is what our general overview of the agenda looks like. On the 5th, you can collect insights for your scavenger hunt. Again, that's a Word document that I'll be sharing digitally with everyone to access. If you're at the OSEP conference, you can use it. If you're not at the OSEP conference, we encourage you to use it at any conference you are attending, or any other events that you might be having. On August 5th, we've got a SPDIG social from 6 to 7:30 p.m. ET. The location is currently being developed, the contract, but spoiler alert, we're getting bowling lanes. Hopefully I didn't just jinx the contract, but if you're there, we encourage you to join us from 6 to 7:30 for bowling. Then August 6th, attend the SPDIG program area meeting that's from 11:30 to 12:45 on the 6th. Share ideas from your scavenger hunt will be one of the activities that we'll be doing during that program area meeting. And then, as I intonated a moment ago, we'll also be working on drafting step 2 of that workbook with your team if they're present. If your team isn't present, then it's a good chance to be thinking and talking with other teams that are there and drafting along with their ideas as well. Then after the OSEP conference, workbook step 3, to be kind of on track to be ready for the national meeting. We're thinking draft of step 3 with your team done by September 1st. Workbook step 4, a draft being completed by September 30th. And workbook step 5 will be ready to share and look at October 14th, so that we're able to finalize your plans October 15th and 16th as part of the SPDIG national meeting. Again, keep in mind that that meeting will be virtual this year. So if you've got any questions about that, I feel like that was quite a mouthful to get through, and I'm pushing because I'm really excited to hear from Stacy and our other presenters. But if you've got any questions, feel free to take your microphones off mute and ask me, or put it in the chat. I know with myself, a lot of times the questions invariably come right after question and answer time's over. So feel free to reach out to myself at signetwork@uoregon.edu, or Jennifer Coffey at her email as well, and let us know any thoughts or questions you might have. But let me give just a pause and see if anybody's got any questions now. All right. Then with that, I want to go ahead and let Stacy Williams talk to us briefly about New York's MTSS Summit. And Stacy, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you take over the controls.
Thank you, John. I saw Tina in the audience, so Tina, come on.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I'm so happy, we're happy to be here to tell you a little bit about our summer conference that we put on every summer in New York State. And let me do this for a moment. This is our disclaimer. All right, so here we go. So I'll introduce myself and then I'll let Tina introduce herself. So my name is Stacy Williams. I'm the MTSSI director, and our center is located at the University of Albany, and I get to work with the amazing Tina. So Tina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I am Tina Meinegian. I am the project manager for the MTSSI Center, and I work for the Office of Special Education at the New York State Education Department. And I'm the lucky one because I get to work with Stacy.
All right, thanks, Tina. All right, so why are we here? So I have 15 minutes, and John, please stop me if I'm over time. All right, so Jennifer actually asked us to share with you some of the strategies and structures that we use to coordinate our statewide conference. I'm going to be sharing with you some of the challenges that we've encountered, but also some of our successes. And so I had coffee prior to this meeting, so I'm likely to talk very fast. So this is perfect. So we are currently in year 3 of planning our conference, but I'm going to walk you through where we started. So we have a deliverable to put on a conference for all educational stakeholders across the state. And we do this in August every year. And so our very first year, we really focused on introducing to stakeholders our framework. And it was basically hot off the press, and we wanted folks to know what the pilot framework was, but more importantly, where they could find resources to support this work outside of our pilot. In doing so, in our very first year, we had over 2,000 folks register for this conference, and you can see on the left of your screen the number of folks who actually attended day 1 and day 2 of our conference. Given that this was the first year that we did this, we had a lot of repeat registrants our first year. In our second year, we actually took care of this, so our numbers were truer then. But little Gory. So this is what happens when you try to talk really fast. So I'm going to slow down. So we had all of those individuals registered and folks showed up. On the right of your screen, you're actually seeing the data that we collected from our audiences on day 1 and day 2 as to their knowledge level pre and post attending our sessions. And so what you're finding with our virtual sessions is that it was very successful in actually increasing the knowledge of the attendees in terms of their understanding of our pilot framework. Earlier today, I shared with John that one of the things that we used in putting together our first conference where we stole some ideas from Virtual Engagement book that was written by Chad Littlefield. John actually introduced us to this book at our first SPDIG meeting in the spring of 23, I believe, John. And John also introduced us to Priya Parker's work on the art of gathering. And so my team and I read the art of gathering, and we read virtual engagement in our preparation for this particular conference. In our second conference, we really took the feedback from our first conference, the feedback from our educational stakeholders to really think through what our second conferences were going to be, what our second conference would be about. So we really focused on impressing upon our stakeholders across the state that the future was now and that we had access to pioneering educational practices, which was MTSSI, to actually support the needs, the psychoeducational needs of our students across the state. With this conference, we got a little bit more bolder in the sense that we actually offered competing presentations at the same time slot. I work with an amazing team at Cornell. I have to give a shout out to Michelle Alvarez. When I call her with my crazy ideas, I'm like, Michelle, can we do this? What would this look like? Michelle will say to me, Stacy, we can make it work. As you're seeing in our second conference, we had over 1,600 individuals registered. So that's now a true registration number. We didn't have any repeat registrants in that number. In addition, we had an increase in the number of folks who actually responded to our survey. And again, you're seeing our numbers increasing in our day 1 and day 2 attendance. We also had an amazing social media campaign where we were able to tap in to the social media of LinkedIn, X, and Facebook, where we advertised our conference across the state. On the screen, you're seeing the surveys from day 1 and day 2 of our conferences. You're also seeing, again, an increase in knowledge for our participants. You're also seeing on a Likert scale of 1 to 5 that the majority of the attendees found the speakers, the presentations, the sessions to be engaging and informative. And so I was happy to see that. My evaluator, Leslie, who's in the audience, was also happy to see that, and Tina was happy to see that. Now, Tina and I are, one of the things I like about ChatGPT is that you can create images. So I told ChatGPT to create an image of a Black woman with locks and a white woman with blonde hair. So that's Tina and I, according to ChatGPT. So what are our celebrations? We have been very intentional in the very beginning to have a clear vision and purpose to what our conferences were going to be about. So we have a process within New York where we collect feedback from multiple stakeholders, and then I take all of that information and I put it into a proposal and I send it to Tina, and Tina takes it to State Ed and have additional conversations and bring it back to me. and say, okay, Stace, this is going to be the focus. So I take that as sort of my advanced organizer. And then one of the things that we do is then we built a conference around that. One of the things that we do is that we take submission ideas from our MTSSI coaches, and I also go into the field to find expert individuals who be able to deliver keynote addresses on our vision and our purpose. Again, when we talk about stakeholder engagement, our pilot schools are contributing what they want the conference to be about. The coaches are contributing, state ed is contributing, and myself. We also have a quality assurance process, which Tina manages, and Lord knows I love her because she has the eye of an eagle, where she and her team actually reviews a lot of the things that we produce so that on presentation day, they're top quality. Tina, do you want to talk about that, or let me keep
Sure,
going?
I can. We have what we call in-house at the State Education Department, a materials review team. And that's exactly what we do. We review materials. So first we review the proposal, as Stacy is saying, then it comes to us pretty presentation ready. We look at it. If there's regulations in there, we might have our policy unit look at it, maybe our preschool, we make sure that regulations are right, all of those fun things. And then we send any feedback on our forms back to Stacy and her team. They make those edits, any questions, comments, we have conversation, and then we have a final product and it's ready to go. And once it's all presented, we put it on our website.
Thank you, Tina. And a lot of the planning that we do is truly responsive to all of our stakeholders. So we actually put on a conference that's pretty much inclusive to everyone. So you can actually show up and get something. There's also a strong commitment to equity. One of the pillars of our framework is a culturally responsive sustaining education framework, which is CRSE. And so at every conference, we make sure to have a presenter who will talk about MTSSI through an equity lens. This is a lot of work. It's a lot of coordination, and I'm in awe of my graduate students. They're leaving me this year. They're in the doctoral program, the school psych program at SUNY Albany, and they are my conference committee team members. We joke that Jamaicans would say we little but we tall, which means that we are a small but mighty team, and they've been in charge of our social media campaign and our blast. And our social media blast is we send at least 2 blasts out per month starting in January to really judge up an interest in our conference. We also email prior registrants, and we also email our IHEs at least once a month outside of our pilot. Now, how do we find our keynote speakers? I'm a school psychologist by training, and these are my professional networks. I've had leadership positions in the organizations that you see there, and I leverage my leadership positions in those organizations. In addition, I also do a lot of professional crowdsourcing. So at a SPDIG conference, I met Kimberly St. Martin. I went up to her, asked for her autograph, actually at one of those mixers in DC. And then I just said, can you speak at my conference? She said yes. And then I call her every year and I'm like, who else are you going to recommend? This is what I'm thinking about. So that's professional crowdsourcing. And I do go to conferences. I walk around, and if I see folks that I like, I give them my card and I say, let's talk about you presenting at the conference. And I should tell you that the folks that I normally find, I can't pay them what they're worth. So I always, I'm selling some kidney for them to come for a small honorarium, but I'm very grateful for that. Now, what are our challenges? Our challenges are compressed timelines. When I work with keynote presenters who are not used to their materials being reviewed, you can just imagine the challenges that entails. Folks are like, why am I giving you my presentation in May when I'm presenting in August? And I'm like, because it needs to be reviewed. And so it is a compressed timeline, working with individuals who are flying all over the country and really making sure. I feel like I'm a middleman where I'm nurturing relationships and leveraging referent power bases so that they won't bail ship, but actually show up on presentation day. In terms of planning the conference, we really struggle with, do we do this broad stroke, or do we provide sessions that are truly in depth. We really don't have the time for that. So a lot of our planning is at the very surface level. There are some constraints when it comes to a virtual format, and every year we try to tweak it a bit, but it does and it continues to remain challenging. There's a lot of external coordination. There's a lot of offices that we're dealing with to actually get to our presentation day. And of course, there are limitations with budget and actually being able to afford a lot of the keynote speakers that we bring in. Some of our keynote speakers have speaking fees that are like $5,000, and we ain't got the money for that, but they have come. I probably shouldn't say that too loud, but they've come for less than that. And this is when I have no problems thanking Black Jesus. Now, when we talk about virtual engagement, we use a lot of Mentimeter in our work. We also, Jennifer has asked, Stacy, how do you get presenters to have engagement activities like during their presentation? Because Jennifer has come to our conferences, and I actually write my presenters an email with an advanced organizer with stuff that they can do for their presentations. And I also recommend them to Project Zero. Project Zero has a lot of engagement activities, and many of my presenters have found that to be very helpful. One of the things that I've learned in, I think I attended a conference once, Leaning Forward, hopefully I'm saying that right, where we use music for transitions between each of our sessions at the conferences. Music, it's a great cognitive break. It frees up space for you to learn again. And so we've infused that into our conference. And because I am Stacy, there's a lot of reggae at my conference. And we actually use the playlist for Playing for Change, which actually has a lot of inclusive music. And oftentimes at the end of the conferences, people are asking for our playlists. Okay, so John, I have no idea if you sent me stuff because I'm still just, okay. How am I with time, John? Like I'm trying.
I think you're doing great,
Okay.
Stacy.
Thank you. So looking ahead, okay, so I actually thought, Tina and I thought that Summit 3.0 was going to be our last hurrah. And so as it was our last hurrah, I was like, from blueprint to success, let's focus on the engine that drives MTSSI work. The engine that drives MTSSI work is implementation science. And we wanted to introduce educational stakeholders to implementation science across the state. And so that's how we built our virtual summit 3.0. It is August 13th and 14th. You're all invited to attend. Now, I am so excited about our keynote speakers for this year. It was really hard to I won't say find Kamanti, because Kamanti was recommended by the person that did our equity talk last year, but he's an assistant professor at the Ohio State. Let me get that right. He's up and coming. He does the Black Male podcast in school psych. He does a lot of research in SEL and culturally responsive practices. And Kamante he used to be here in New York State at, I think, SUNY Buffalo, but he's coming back and he's going to be talking about MTSS through an equity lens, but more importantly, about, how can we use MTSS to retain Black boys in school? The New York State Board of Regents, they have a Black Male Initiative, and so his presentation is very much aligned with that. Many of you in this space know Karen Ward and Sophia Farmer. Sophia Farmer will be talking about internal coaching, but more so, how do you do that without external coaching so that you can think about sustainability? And Karen Ward is just going to give us the nuts and bolts of implementation science. And we have Claudia Rinaldi from LaSalle, who'll be talking to us about using MTSS to support ENL learners. So I'm really excited about our keynote speakers. Now, you can come to our conference. Like we last year we had individuals from the Caribbean, we had individuals from other states attend our conference. So it's actually open to anyone. I know John has probably put in the chat the link to the conference so you can see what other sessions we will be highlighting this year. I think I did that in 15 minutes. Questions, comments, or concerns? And you can contact us here. All right, I'm going to stop sharing in case anyone has any questions. You got to love coffee. Whew.
Stacy, I really appreciate working with you. I've seen you in multiple different states now. I think that's the fastest I've seen you talk yet. Thank you for doing that and bringing this to people's attention. I do want to highlight that, of course, I put the links that you provided in the chat. Project Zero at Harvard, as well as the link to MTSSI Summit 2025.
Thank you, John.
Okay, then with that, I am going to share my screen. And pass the microphone over to Soon Young Ahn, who is going to introduce our presenters for today.
Great, thanks, John. And Tina and Stacy, your conference sounds fantastic. I was looking at Project Zero and I was learning a lot too. So thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Sun Young. Jennifer Coffey is out of the office today, so I have the great honor of introducing our presenters, Doctors Patricia Snyder, Darby Ann Shannon, and Kirsten Kinder. They will talk about practice-based coaching today and PBC framework. We call it PBC in short. Practice-based coaching framework is really well known in early childhood field. So they are being implemented in Head Start programs and special education classrooms, other early childhood classrooms, and also early intervention home visiting settings too. Patricia's team with Darby and Kirsten, they were funded by OSEP, I think 2020 or 2021. Let me know, was it 20 or 21? 4 or 5 years ago. So they were funded by OSEP for their model demonstration project in practice-based coaching. And they have a lot of great outcomes, and they have talked to many OSEP grantee groups as well. I know a couple months ago, they talked to our early childhood community of practice group within SPIDIC as well. And their presentation is going to be fantastic. And although I said it's more well-known in early childhood, we know that this coaching framework will be applicable and useful in school-based settings as well. So I know their presentation will be fantastic, and I hope everyone will enjoy, and this will be really informative. So thank you so much. And the stage is yours, Pat, Darby, and Kirsten.
Thanks, Sun Young. And you were absolutely right. It was 2020. So thank you for remembering that. And hi, everybody. I'm Pat Snyder. I'm part of the project Practice-Based Coaching Data Informed Decision-Making team. And as Sun Young mentioned, I'm here with my colleagues, both from the University of Florida and Vanderbilt University. We can go to the next slide. As Sun Young mentioned, we were funded as a model demonstration project. We want to acknowledge the support from our project officer, Anita Vermeer. We are also one of 3 model demonstration early childhood coaching projects that were funded in this round of OSEP funding. And we've been working very closely with our colleagues who are also part of the 3 model demonstration projects that are part of PBC, that PBC DIDM is a participant in. We can go to the next slide. So we want to acknowledge some of our PBC DIDM colleagues who are not here with us today, but certainly have been instrumental in the project. Maureen Conroy, Mary Louise Hemmeter, Sarah Basler, and Jennifer Harrington. And we are all associated with either Vanderbilt University or the University of Florida. We've had a long history of collaboration around practice-based coaching, and starting in 2007, even before that, probably 2003. So we've been working at this for quite some time, and we were really pleased and excited to receive money to look at a data-informed decision-making component and tools and resources to support people around their implementation of coaching efforts and effects. And we also want to give a big shout out to our partners, our 6 model demonstration sites Sun Young mentioned as part of our model demonstration site. Many of you who are in early childhood know that in addition to thinking about school-based supports for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, we also have to think about collaborations with other early childhood programs. And so our partner sites covered the birth to 5 age span and included programs that included young children or were targeted for young children, infants, toddlers, and preschoolers who had either IFSPs or IEPs, so who were receiving early intervention or early childhood special education programs. So in California, we had 1 special area local planning agency, or SELPA, and also housed, co-located in a county office of education, which was a Head Start grantee. So that was one of our demonstration sites. We had a large urban school district in California. That was one of our demonstration sites. In Florida, as Sun Young mentioned, we have a large statewide initiative here in Florida that's focused on early intervention and caregiver coaching practices in early intervention, and that's been going on for quite some time. So we worked with 2 regions who are using practice-based coaching. So we partnered with 2 of those regional early intervention programs as model demonstration sites here in Florida. And then in Tennessee, our partners in Tennessee were working with a Head Start grantee that included both early Head Start and Head Start, as well as wraparound childcare. And then, not to be swayed by taking on a state level childcare resource and referral system in the state of Tennessee. And those of you who work in early childhood know what we mean by that, not to be daunted by that. So we learned a lot of important things from our model demonstration sites. And today we'll be just talking about PBC DIDM and some of the things that tools and resources that we've developed as part of PBC DIDM. But we are happy at any time to talk further with people offline if they're interested, if they're working with sites or there's SPTIG involved sites that are similar to the ones that we were doing as part of our model demonstration project. So we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Kirsten to get us started.
Great, thanks, Pat. So my name's Kirsten Kinder, and I'm assistant professor of the practice at Vanderbilt University in the Integrated Early Childhood Program. And after teaching for 10 years, I spent the second half of my career studying coaching, and I've been fortunate enough to work with this team to bring PBC to the next level, which is just, I feel, has been so important to dig deeper into. And I'm really just looking forward to sharing all of that with you today. As we get started, I wanted to take just a minute as part of our warm-up and introductions to bring in one of my favorite parts of early childhood, and that's children's literature. So children's books can be excellent metaphors for complex concepts, even something as complex as your role. One of my favorites is If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, because as someone who straddles the field in research and higher ed, I can see one thing in the classroom and it reminds me of a research study, which reminds me of adding that study to one of my lectures, and so on and so on. So for fun, please put in the chat at a minimum your name, your SPTIG focus, and your state you're from. And if you can, what children's book is a good metaphor for your role, and add that all to the chat. So if you can do that, or even if you just put in your favorite children's book, that's fine too. Maybe we can craft it into something. Pat, why don't you tell us about yours first?
Okay. Well, I picked The Carrot Seed, and I felt like it was a good metaphor for my work in coaching, which has been sustained since the early 90s, because everyone tells the child in the book that his carrot seed won't come up, but he has a vision for what's possible, and he sticks to his routine of watering and weeding and nurturing the seed, and the persistence eventually leads to the desired outcome of a great big carrot. And metaphor for me is that coaching program installation, implementation, and most importantly, sustainability and scale up in authentic settings takes time to implement, and it takes time to gather sufficient data or information to help to make data-informed decisions. and to really see the impact of coaching on practitioner, child, and family outcomes.
Darby, what about yours?
So I can jump in. I'm also a huge lover of children's literature and was a former preschool teacher. And so one of the books that I always used in my classroom was Swimming. And I think it's a good metaphor for my work in coaching because the main character does an excellent job of kind of bringing everyone together around a shared goal and really changing their community and their environment when they all work together. And I think when you're at a state level or a program level and you're really trying to shift what a community is doing and how they're learning and how they're thinking about how they learn, you really have to do a good job of making that shared goal really visible for everyone. So it's been a favorite book that's applicable for young children, but just as relevant to what I'm doing today.
We're getting some good nominations in the chat. So we've got Where the Sidewalk Ends, Oh, the Places You Go. That's one of my favorites too. You Are Stardust. Joseph says it's not a metaphor for his role, but it's his favorite children's book. And Leslie's nominating Oh, the Places You Go. So we've got 2 for that. Stacy's got Poetry Book. Okay. And then Annette has Too Many, so she's locking in on Diary of a Worm. That's an interesting nomination. I don't know that book, so it'd be interesting to hear more about it. And we've got Why Not and Where the Wild Things Are. Great. Get The Giving Tree, another great one, right? They're all great, but some of them that resonate with us, or me in particular. Sorry.
I like
Yeah,
the
go ahead,
one.
Kirsten.
Yeah, sure. I like the one, Why Not? Because it makes me think of, your role like, all right, fine, bring it on. Why not? Let's try that too. So I thought that kind of gave me a smile when you put that in the chat. Wonderful. All right. Well, let's move on. Thank you. You can keep putting those in. We'll enjoy reading them. There's another way this favorite book of mine is a metaphor. So with our PBC DIDM implementation sites that Pat had talked about, we always talked about how looking at data can inform decisions and action steps, but it often just leads to more questions. And especially when our implementation sites would first start, they would be maybe a little leery of data, but then it just kind of grew and grew and grew. So when we're just like in the book where the mouse, you gave him a cookie and then he's gonna want some milk, napkins, all those things. Let's think about it in terms of if you give a program or a state leader some data, they'll likely have a few questions. So let's see, if you get some outcome data, you're going to wonder maybe what did that teacher or practitioner do to support the student or child? How do we get those outcomes, right? And that might make you think of what professional learning supported that teacher or practitioner. So how did that teacher know what to do to support the child, to support the data, the student outcomes? And then you might think, well, okay, so was that professional learning really aligned with the high leverage practices we wanted? Did we have the right information there, the right content? And then it might lead you to another question about coaching. Well, we had the professional learning, but did it include coaching? So did they get that job embedded support that we know is so very powerful? So as you can see, the questions keep coming and coming. So what else might you want to know about coaching data? So if you had a few thoughts in the chat you wanted to put in about coaching data, we know that SPIDIG projects have an emphasis on professional development and that coaching is a really important part of it. So what other questions might you have about coaching? As we go through, please, we're encouraging you to use the chat. We'll be monitoring it. We'd like to, I want to tell you right now, if we move over to the next slide, what we're going to be talking about. Hopefully that'll cover some of your questions. but please always add in those. We're going to be also asking for some input with some polls along the way, so be ready for those. So after our talk today, we really want you to know the parts of the PBC DIDM model. We're going to tell you all about the differences between effort data and effect data and how they interact. And they have this cascading framework, how they're all connected within each other. And we're going to help you identify sources of effort and effect data connected to your professional learning and coaching in your SPIDIG. So our goal is to give you information, but also have you be thinking about it and applying it to what you're doing in your SPIDIG. Okay, so let's get started. Pat?
Sorry, unmuting. So I'm going to set the stage really quickly by providing just a real broad overview of both PBC, but then also why PBC DIDM. So as we've mentioned several times, PBC is one coaching framework. It's commonly used in early childhood, as was mentioned earlier. It shares many common ingredients with other effective coaching approaches, evidence-informed active ingredients, including shared goal setting and action planning, focused observation of practice implementation in context in some way, and then the opportunity for supportive or individual self-reflection and feedback. All of those things, as you can see on the diagram, are wrapped around, as Kirsten mentioned, a set of identified effective practices. So it's agnostic with respect to the content, but it necessitates that the what's in the center that's being wrapped around, that practice-based coaching is being wrapped around, are a set of practices that have been shown to be effective or very highly valued based on experiences in the field, and that lead to positive outcomes for both practitioners as well as children, youth, and families. All of practice-based coaching interactions occur, and you'll see the outermost circle that wraps around our framework. All of these components or parts of practice-based coaching, shared goal setting and action planning, focused observation, reflection and feedback about practice implementation, all occur in the context of collaborative coaching partnerships or collaborative partnerships. So as was mentioned earlier, we have been studying this framework of coaching for over 20 years now. We have someone put in the chat, what's the impact on student achievement? I can speak to the impact on student achievement for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers across some of our studies that we've done or studies that others have done in early childhood that have used practice-based coaching. And I don't want to be held to this exact number, but relatively speaking, we see some effect sizes that range anywhere from 0.15 to as much as 0.75 or even higher, depending on what the outcome measure is. And again, something I'd be happy to talk further about. We'd be happy to talk further about with people offline if they're interested. Now, we had this practice-based coaching framework and had been studying it and using it for a long time. And then the call came out from the model demonstration projects, inviting projects to make an application for a model demonstration project around coaching. And you might be asking, well, why did we apply for OSEP funding? The reason we applied for OSEP funding is we knew that we needed some support to add a value-added component to practice-based coaching, where we made very explicit the importance of gathering data about not only coaching effects, which is a great question, going to the bottom line, like Kirsten mentioned, thinking about those child and family outcomes and practitioners' implementation of practices, but also making a legitimate and very focused effort to look at how were our coaching efforts working towards the effects that we were looking for, and being able to have good data about coaching efforts. And so as you'll hear as we move along in just a second to the next slides, we're going to talk about the components of the data-informed decision-making model that we built as part of the model demonstration project in collaboration with our partners and their partners to produce what we are calling PBC DIDM, or data-informed decision-making. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you, Darby.
Thanks, Pat. So I did, when we got started, drop into the chat, and I know John emailed it to you guys, a handout. And so throughout today's session, we really do want you to look at and think about the information that we're sharing and ask yourself how that connects to the work that you're doing within your SPDIG and within your state. Feel free to jot down thoughts and ideas in the handout we've provided. Or certainly to add them to the chat if you think that they would be valuable for helping the community learn together and to share those thoughts and ideas. And so, as Pat just mentioned, PBC DIDM is really about an evidence-informed approach to coaching and gathering data about that approach. And so we want to just gather a little bit of information from all of you about what best describes the coaching activities in your SPDIG. Are you really focused on just mentoring right now, but not yet coaching? Do you have a set of coaching strategies, but not a defined framework? Or at this point, have you adopted practice-based coaching or another evidence-informed framework? And we're getting good numbers right away. So thanks for those that are participating and responding. That's really helpful. And if you are saying that you do have a named evidence-informed approach, if you'll put it in the chat, I think that's always helpful information to share. So if somebody is in the group that hasn't yet adopted something, they might have an idea of where to look.
And while you all are responding to the poll, I just want to reiterate what Darby was saying, and what I've said is that the models that you're using may have some of the same ingredients or parts that I talked about around PBC, and that's great. Things like instructional coaching, right? There are other coaching frameworks or approaches that have similar active ingredients. And so, we deliberately chose the name for practice-based coaching because the important ingredient for us in our coaching model was to support the implementation of effective or high leverage, or what we call in early childhood, recommended practices in our field.
Yeah. And so I've gone ahead and shared the results. Thanks again so much for those of you that did answer the poll. And it looks like in all of our sites, there's coaching happening, which is really exciting. And about 70% of you reported that you have a named model or framework that's evidence-informed. And we know that's really important for reaching those outcomes that we want to see for coaching. And a handful of you guys also responded that, as Pat mentioned, you have some defined coaching strategies, but have not yet adopted a formal framework. And so we know those frameworks are so important for making sure that we're able to provide comprehensive support to our coaches, which we'll talk more about today, when we do that ongoing support for them around the coaching work that they're doing. And so let's jump in and talk a little bit more about the PBC DIDM model. And so when a program or a state adopts practice-based coaching, data-informed decision-making, we really think there are 4 structures that facilitate success. So the first is having a leadership team. And when we say leadership team, it looks different in all of our implementation sites and across the different states that we work with. And so a leadership team is a group of folks that are focused on the data-informed decision-making initiative. This could be a team that is already in place that is adopting this as a new focus area for the team, or it could be a new work group that's formed to really get practice-based coaching, data-informed decision-making up and running, and they're communicating with other boards or leadership teams around the work that they're doing. We've also found that it's really important to have someone who's in a lead coach role, who serves as the liaison between the coach community and the leadership team. That is that voice at the table when the leadership team is making decisions about coaching, about what's happening with boots on the ground in that coach community. Again, lead coaches look different in every site. Sometimes they're a coach who's carrying an active coaching caseload in the field, and they're also supporting other coaches. Sometimes it's someone who was formerly a coach but has moved into a managerial role. There are a lot of different ways that you can set that up, but what's most important there is that there's someone who's connected to that boots on the ground coaching work and what's happening at the leadership level. And then the coach community, that's where we provide that ongoing support for coaches. Initially, where they receive their training around that evidence-informed coaching framework, in our case, practice-based coaching, but also that ongoing community support so that they're able to troubleshoot when things come up or share resources and ideas. And then lastly, practice-based coaching cycles. Of course, we know those are happening with practitioners, whether those be in classrooms or home settings. The other thing about PBC cycles is they don't just happen with practitioners, they also happen between the lead coach and the other coaches in the program. And we think that that feature of having parallel processes for practitioners and coaches is really, really key, so that coaches are getting that feedback about their implementation of practice-based coaching. So these facilitative structures really help the PBC DIDM practices that we're about to look at to be successfully implemented. So when we talk about the model, there are 4 components to it. Starting on the left, we have the PBC DIDM implementation profile. The implementation profile is like a strengths and needs assessment, and it's a tool that the team can use to identify what they're doing really well related to practice-based coaching at the foundational level and the use of data at the initial, mid, and advanced level. And as it progresses, it starts off with really looking at just that coaching data. But as you guys mentioned, we want to think about the connection between coaching and child and family outcomes. And as you work your way up to the top of the profile, it's really helping you to think about how do you make those connections all the way across from what's happening at the state level to what's happening for young children and families. So when we talk about data, we think about our data as effort and effect data. And we want to be sure that we have multiple sources of effort data, which is around what we're doing, how much we're doing, how well we're doing it, and effects. Are our efforts making a difference? Because we want to be sure that any precious resources and time that we're spending is really having the intended impact or outcome that we want to see. Efforts and effects happen at multiple levels. And so as Kirsten mentioned, we think about a cascading effort and effect framework. And that's the 3rd set of boxes. And so it starts with the leadership team up at the top that supports the coaches support the practitioners, and the practitioners support the children and families. And we'll dig deeper into that today. And then on the far right, you see the prepare, look, think, act process. And so we think it's really important that there is a shared decision-making process that's used by the coach community, the leadership team, and sometimes even practitioners and coaches when they're making data-informed decisions about what are the next steps or actions that they want to take based on the available data that they have. And so we have the 4 facilitative structures and the 4 parts of the model. And those structures really help teams to implement the model as intended. So as I mentioned, we're going to dig in on just 2 parts, effort and effect, and thinking about that cascade. So as a SPDIG, you're sitting up at the very tip top of that cascading framework, and you're supporting leadership teams and lead coaches, often within programs, districts, or grantees. And we're thinking about how your efforts have an effect on those leaders' knowledge and skills around the effective practices or coaching. Leadership teams then support the coaches, who are more those boots on the ground, providing support to practitioners, and those practitioners are reaching our children and families. And at every step of the way, we want to be sure that we have data that's helping us to make sure that all of the efforts you're putting in up at the state level are making it fluidly down to young children and families, and that there aren't any breaks in the chain or chinks. And if there are, we want to make them a little bit stronger. And so, as we mentioned, Sun Young and Pat mentioned, not only do we think about children and families, but in our early intervention settings, we're often thinking of what practitioners or early intervention home visiting providers are doing to build the capacity of families to support young children's IFSP goals in the home environment, or sometimes the classroom environment as well. And so we really have found that this cascading effort and effect framework has a lot of flexibility, but it is a very useful visual for thinking about how complex systems can work towards a common goal of supporting young children and their families. And so with that, we're going to zoom in on just one small section of this cascade, and Kirsten's going to pick up that part for us. So I'll pass it off.
Thanks, Darby. So as we zoom in, I just want to talk just to be very clear on what we consider efforts and what we consider effects. Okay, so this cascade uses a RBA framework within your SPDIG, right? So it's kind of thinking like a logic model with inputs and outputs, but they're all focused on what are the actions or tactics that are being used to provide positive outcomes on the other side. Okay. So when we think about efforts, that describes what's being done or what support is being offered. It's measured in two ways: how much and how well. How much is really about the quantity or the dose, how many times, for how long, things like that. And when we think about the the effects, that describes the impact of our efforts. That looks at whether efforts are making a difference, if the people supported are better off. Okay, so efforts impact the effects. So let's look at an example. Let's zoom in here to one part of the cascade that Darby showed just a few slides ago. And let's look more carefully at coach efforts. Okay, so specifically coaches, and how we might measure how much coaching is occurring and how well, or the amount and effectiveness or quality of coaching. And so what I want to share with you is a coaching log. Okay, so a coaching log completed by coaches after their observations and debriefs can be used to measure coach efforts. Okay, it might contain key data such as time spent in coaching, time spent preparing, coach preparation. It could be observations, time and debrief, the staff that were involved, how many sessions, what number session it was. It could be referred to as a checklist, a coaching checklist, or maybe, even a tracker. The name isn't as important. We call it a log in PBCDIDM, but what's important is that it's capturing what happened. How many PBC cycles were needed to reach a goal? How much support was given? What kinds of supports were given? What formats happened? Was it a virtual meeting? Did something get missed? All of that information can really inform when we're thinking about what those effects are, okay, later. Ideally, we'd want this to be electronically done so we can pull in and analyze the data very easily. So the efforts are also included, or we want to think about how well. Oh, this was how well. I'm so sorry. So how well is when we're thinking about what's intended for coaching, right? What are the key components that are really important to your district or agency? Okay, so it's this form. When I was coaching out in the field, this was my guide. I used this to be sure that I was hitting all the key points that were really important to have for that research-backed coaching model, to be sure that I was implementing it as it was intended to be. It serves as a self-monitoring tool that coaches can use to say, what areas am I struggling with? Or, man, I'm not getting to all the steps. What kinds of things could I do differently? It's a tool for those who support coaches to know where might we need to target support. And that's the data-informed decision piece. Okay. Darby and Pat, anything else about the coaching logs that you feel like is important to mention here?
Just, I think, Kirsten, we call them logs. Other people might call them checklists. Other people
Sure.
might call them guides. Other people might call them other names. But I think the important thing is, right, as you said, just to have a way to look at data that are particularly informative around how much time and effort is going into coaching, and is coaching being delivered as intended.
Wonderful.
And we often found, right, that as we took our research into practice, that those data were some of the hardest data for people to really gather and understand why it was so important, particularly at a systems level where you're thinking about, if you're thinking about it from an implementation science perspective and you're thinking about scale up and sustainability, it's really important to be thinking about those types of coach effort data, even back to at initial installation.
For sure. So we're a little bit curious. We have another poll. Is how are you measuring the efforts of coaches in your SPIDIG? So answer as many as you can check as many as apply to you. But are you just still exploring? You're not there yet. Are you measuring maybe how many visits, the how much piece? What about the how well piece? Sometimes that piece can be much more difficult to kind of get a grasp on. Coaching goals met, the practice focus of coaching goals. So what the coaching is about specifically, if you have a more complex package. And is it electronic or not? I'm so curious about these things. So go ahead and answer. And I don't have control over that part.
Yeah, we're about halfway there. So I'm going to give folks who are still checking because there's a few different things to look at.
That's
So,
right.
yeah, I think no matter what coaching framework you are using, or even if you just have a set of strategies, and that's, 100% of you said that you were using either a named framework or had some strategies. I do agree with Kirsten as a coach that log or checklist was a tremendously helpful self-monitoring tool, because when I went into my coaching sessions, I would just take it with me and it would help me to remember, like, don't forget these important ingredients. So I often referred to it throughout my meetings. And so I just, as a tool for me, it was a great guide. And I know as I'm supporting coaches at coach community meetings and things like that, I love to look at that data to make sure that I'm really focusing on things that are important to my coach community. So I can't emphasize how helpful it has been as a tool at multiple levels.
Absolutely.
While they're working on the poll, I would just say too that we have some very interesting exploratory evidence to suggest that coaches who do engage in that self-monitoring of their coaching have higher levels of implementing coaching as intended. So it's not always relying only or solely on an external, not that that's unimportant, but it's also important to be thinking about that piece from initial installation as well.
So it looks like that measuring how much, not surprising that kind of data, collecting that data, a little bit more prevalent than how well. So that might be something to reflect on and think through. What do we need to maybe add to or boost to our coaching log or coaching checklist to include those other components? Thinking about how many coaching goals have met and measuring that practice focus is about half of you. So this is great. And 65% using electronic system, wonderful. That can often be the hardest step to go from a piece of paper to inputting it somewhere, that we found with our implementation sites. But once we were able to show the impact of that data and the decisions you could make, it was just eye-opening. So a really exciting thing to see. Okay. Any other thoughts? There we go.
Oh, here we go. So, one of the cool things about coaching logs is that not only do they measure the efforts of coaches, but they also measure the effect of the leadership team and SPDIG. So we're spending a lot of time providing training to coaches, giving coaches resources, and we want to know, are the efforts of the leadership team having an effect on our coaches' knowledge of the coaching framework, their skills out in the field, their use of those coaching strategies? Is it helping them to implement it with fidelity or as intended? And the coaching log actually gives you both sources of data. And so, as Kirsten mentioned, when we have it electronic, we can grab some quick, just-in-time numbers that would help to inform our ongoing coach supports, whether that be coach community meetings, individual supports, emails. There's a lot of different ways to bring coaches together. And so here's just a quick snapshot of one of the demonstration sites that we worked with. They had a large district with 28 coaches. Each coach had 10 practitioners. And we can quickly see that there was an average of 5.7 visits with each practitioner. So we're getting that sense of how much coaching is happening, how much effort is going into each one of those classrooms. On average, they had met 2.75 goals. And so in that period of time, we know that they were working on a couple of different practices, really refining those. We have a sense of how many activities or routines they typically had a chance to observe. How long were they focused on that observation in the classroom? About 41 minutes. Coaches took about 17 minutes to prepare their notes, and those meetings were about 21 minutes on average. And so that's really important as we're thinking at a higher level about coaching caseloads and what's really feasible at the program level or even at the state level, depending on the structure that you're using for your SPDIG. So all of this data is really important, but all it tells me is how much. It doesn't tell me anything about the quality or how well coaching was happening. Like, were they actually providing supportive and constructive feedback? Were they actually engaging the educator in reflection? And to answer that question, we need that second half of the coaching log or checklist Kirsten showed. And so this data tells us how well. It tells us a little bit more about whether or not the essential PBC strategies were being used. So in 84% of the visits, the coaches engaged in reflection. And 97% they did supportive feedback. Coaches love to give supportive feedback. That's probably one of our favorites. But equally important is that that constructive feedback is happening. Because if coaches are only going in and telling coachees or educators what they're already doing well, they're not helping them to grow. And so as a leader or a lead coach, if I'm looking at this data, I'm right away starting to plan for my next coach community meeting or coach workshop. And I'm thinking, I'm going to give a little boost around constructive feedback. I might give some resources around how they can continue to enhance reflection for their educators or practitioners. And so we want to be sure that we have not only how much, but also a sense of how well is it happening with fidelity or as intended. Now, all of the things I've showed so far are self-reported or self-monitoring, as Pat mentioned. So these are what coaches are saying. And we know it's not possible to record and watch every coaching session. But we know that that can also be a really helpful window into how well coaching is happening. And so in many of our demonstration sites, the lead coach or even the coaches as peers exchanged video recordings of their coaching sessions. And that allowed them to think about other dimensions of fidelity that may not be captured on a coaching log or checklist. And those opportunities to kind of peek in to those coaching sessions were really, really important. And so self-reported coaching log data and the coaching log itself is one support. Having another coach kind of peek in and watch those videos is a way to provide support. And Pat's going to talk with us now about lots of other ways that leadership teams and SPDIGs work together to provide initial and ongoing supports for coaches. So I'm going to pass it off to Pat.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for folks to have questions in the chat as well. So I'll try to keep this brief, and then we can open it up for you all to really ask us some questions, or we can dig a little bit more deeply around this idea of SPDIGs and leadership teams and lead coaches and whatnot. So if we go to the next slide, Darby. These are some of the things that we thought about, right, that could be considered or would be considered in our framework. Efforts by either a SPDIG or a program-specific leadership team, their efforts to support coaches. So that includes things like workshops about the coaching model. In our case, it would be workshops around to support, right, to support efforts to support people's knowledge, skills, and dispositions around practice-based coaching. It also, in our work, always includes, because again, of having the effective practices at the center of the framework, it also includes making sure that there are efforts to ensure that everybody on the team has an understanding at some level, has knowledge, and of course, for the coaches and the leadership teams, program leadership teams, skills and dispositions, right, about those effective practices. And so we also see those effective practices workshops as efforts to support coaches. And of course, downstream in our cascade, others as well. But right now we're talking about the efforts of SPDIGs and program leadership efforts to support coaches. We've mentioned the coaching log. The one thing we haven't talked about, and many of you probably have this as well, but we found that having manuals, right, that actually define the coaching process, the framework, the essential practices, the enhancement practices that can serve as a really important resource for coaches. Video exemplars, job aids such as video exemplars, as Darby mentioned earlier, resources, additional resources around what is constructive feedback. Let's dig deeper. You know, here's a resource that you might want to use, but we're making those efforts as leadership teams to provide the resources or the opportunities for those things to be available. So those are what we mean by efforts. And then, as Darby mentioned, we also have things on here like a lead coach, and we've talked about this, who coaches other coaches, the importance of that video-based feedback. And again, we've done this successfully in statewide initiatives, and being very cognizant of time and effort and cost. But that's why, again, looking at these data and some of the data that Darby shared is really important for teams to be able to make these kinds of decisions. Having these effort data available, making those efforts and having them available. And then the community of practice and support for a community of practice, because we want to make sure that we have opportunities for people to continue to have learning communities for ongoing and continuous improvement. And so having, again, supporting efforts, having efforts to support those kinds of activities by SPDIG and program leadership teams are incredibly important. And then having data about being able to look at, are they having their intended effect? So if a community of practice is not working, or it's not looking like it's looking like it's very cost prohibitive, or there are other things that need to be taken into consideration, there are data that help us make decisions about perhaps modifying our approaches to implementation or changing our implementation strategies. So with that in mind, I think this is the last slide that we'll talk through, just to give you a couple of examples. The importance of this slide is really to just build on what I was just talking about earlier, in terms of what you see here is the way we might lay this out with teams as we're talking to them about effort and effect data. And we would think about the things that they're doing and kind of classify and talk about what is it that you want to measure as a function of your workshop. And we all are very familiar with measuring things like how many people attended, right? What their levels of satisfaction were, And all of those things are important, of course. Having them be reflective about what they've learned. Perhaps even some of you are using knowledge kinds of approaches to see, did people gain knowledge as a function of participation in the workshop? But we really want to make sure that we also are thinking about things like, was that workshop implemented as intended? Another example is a PBC workshop, right? And the question you want to measure is how much time does it take to train a new coach? Well, by looking at the checklist, right, you can gather information about how much time it's taking a coach to participate in a workshop on PBC. So 12 hours of effort for a coach to deliver a workshop, right? I'll jump down. We've talked about effect, the satisfaction, but again, just really harping on the effect piece. As Kirsten and Darby and I keep saying, what we've learned most from our work is the importance of stretching to think a little bit more about not only how much, but how well. And that's really the last box on this slide. So hopefully we've given you a couple of ideas about how the framework might be helpful for informing your work or others' work around questions that you might all be interested in pursuing when you're thinking about coaching efforts and coaching effects. And I think we probably want to stop and just have you all think about the data that you're collecting, one last poll, and then we'll open it up for some discussion and questions. So this one is really focused on what data you're collecting about your SPDIG and your leadership efforts to support coaches. And again, it's multiple choice. So take some time, that hopefully will lead to our discussion, and I'll turn it back over to Darby to bring us home.
I know this one's a little bit longer, so I can see folks are really reading carefully, and that's great. So take some time to really reflect and think about, you know, what might be next steps as a result of today's conversation and reflection about how can you strengthen your SPDIG work going into the next year. So thanks for taking the time to really read these carefully. I can share as it's coming in because folks are really reading carefully, and I want to provide time for that. But looks like attendance, as Pat mentioned, is something that most programs are doing. About 60% have those workshop implementation checklists, which is great. Really thinking about the content of those workshops. More than half of you have some online learning resources for coaches, which is amazing. Can use at different times and access when it works for them. And not surprisingly, as you do move down to the bottom, it is what we would consider that more complex support that you really do have to think carefully about as a leadership team around how to best use your resources. Slowing down, we'll give it about 30 more seconds. And certainly while we're waiting for the last couple of folks, if this has raised any questions for you or you're looking for tools or resources that might support you to engage in any of the processes that are on this list, go ahead and put that in the chat for us, because that will help us as we're engaging in conversation to think about resources we can share. All right, I've stopped it. I'm giving folks a chance to take a peek.
Leslie's asking if she can get a copy of the coaching log, and the answer is yes, of course. Mhm.
Yeah.
And as our project is coming to an end, we have, and Darby will talk about this, but as the project is coming to an end, we have built a website. It has been accessible to our model demonstration sites, but now we are reformatting it and finalizing it so that it will be widely available, probably sometime toward the end of August, beginning of September. But Leslie, we can share with John and others the log, and that can go in the package of resources that you all can take away. And it'll be on the website as well. Yes, the coach and coachee can complete the coaching log collaboratively. Patty, yep. It's one strategy for sure. Again, what we would say is that I think Kirsten and Darby would agree with me that that's a good strategy, but there also are benefits to having both the practitioner and the coachee do that independently at some points in time, so that the coachee, the coach and the coachee can share their perspectives privately, right, as individuals, and then come together and have a collaborative discussion about it as well. Because it's hard for a coachee to know if they've experienced constructive feedback until they've experienced constructive feedback and know what it is.
And we mentioned a little bit earlier about, I think it was Darby mentioned about that parallel process. So coaches can say to the teachers or practitioners, you know, this coaching log is a way that I get feedback, just like you're getting feedback. And so that transparency of what the log is, it's not a secret that happens later for sure. It's right there in front. And we can check it off as we talk through, and it just kind of serves as a reminder is that we're all growing in our professional development.
And I think both of you are making a really great point about it. There's no secret. It can be completely and totally transparent. And as you know, Patty, in our work, we always talk to practitioners about what they should expect from the practice-based coaching framework, right? That's part of the orientation sessions, right? An important part of orientation sessions in PBC. And to share that and to talk about what it looks like and sounds like is really important.
I do think, Pat, that is one of the most important conversations I have when I think about my collaborative partnership, is that oftentimes coaching means different things to different people, and they may have, you know, as the coachee, experienced a lot of different types of support. And so being really clear with them about, when I say coaching, here's the kinds of things you can expect from me as a coach, the strategies I'll use, the ways that I'll support you, really helps to build a strong foundation for us to work together. And so I see John, so I'm just going to wrap us up. And so as we mentioned, the practice-based coaching data-informed decision-making model has four components or parts. Today, we really focused on the effort and effect and on the cascade. But each of these four different parts of the model has tools that can be used by coaches or leadership teams or SPDIGs to support their implementation of coaching. Whether you're using practice-based coaching or another framework, I do think there's value in each one of these tools, and they do have, you know, relevance to other evidence-informed coaching frameworks. And then I will just leave this thank you. This is our group email address, and that's the website. But as Pat mentioned, we are making heavy changes to it that'll be out at the end of August. And so with that, just a big thank you for sticking with us, and we hope it was helpful. So I'll turn it back to you, John.
Well, fantastic. I personally found this super informative, and watching the chat, I think other people have as well. And there's one comment that it's just in time, so it always feels good to get resources out to people in a manner that can be used. And so, super exciting work that you guys are putting forward. This idea of operationalizing effort in a way that can make sure that your effort affects effects, right? We want efficient efforts to move the needle ultimately, and a lot of times it doesn't. Pat, I think you brought up this point about how the coaching log is also a little bit, you're starting to see some data that's suggesting it in itself is a little bit of an intervention.
It
Yeah.
is, yes. It would suggest it. You're absolutely right, John, and particularly thinking about it right from that self-monitoring perspective, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I find that pretty efficient also, right? This idea that, there's a document that contains critical components that are important to efforts affecting effects. And so, I really find this super, super interesting work. And, this idea that efficient effort will maximize effects. So, thank you again, all three of you, for taking the time to put this together. If you really mean that you're willing to share the coaching log,
Absolutely.
please send that on to me, and I will make sure that gets included with your resources on the SIG Network website. So that
Yeah,
people can
and it'll be
access it.
available, like we mentioned, John, on the website when it's launched too. And that's thanks to OSEP and the support, so it'll be widely available. But we'll send it
Fantastic.
ahead of time for folks. who are
Is it safe to assume that the website will have the same address?
Same address, yep. And if you want, when you log on to it right now, it'll say like under construction, sign up for our mailing list.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyone who goes there today but doesn't find what they need, sign up for the mailing list, and then you'll get an announcement once the updates have been made. So that might be a useful tool as well, but the address won't change a bit.
Well, fantastic. Thank you all three again, and I encourage people to bookmark that website and sign up for that newsletter or the updates. And with that, I'm going to wish everyone a fantastic second 2/3, I guess, of July. And I look forward to seeing those of you who are able to attend the OSEP conference in August. So thanks again, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, thank you.